Thank you so much for joining us tonight. As you know, this is the second event we've had on the subject, if that's the right way of putting it, of poverty. Great delight to introduce Nichola. I first met her when she was, now this is not a sexist comment, Nichola, she was a wee councillor in North Belfast.
That's right.
And she and I were very much in the same area, and we had lots and lots of contact, and we've kept the friendship going really quite well over the last number of years. You were an eminent minister. Am I allowed to say, even though we're being recorded, one of the few who distinguished yourself in the last executive? There were others. But given your experience in the executive, Nichola, I think you know that's why we've invited you to sort of scope the causes of poverty, because poverty isn't just caused by somebody not having enough money. There are many things that play into that. So because of your experience on the executive from across all the departments, really, we've invited you to bring your wisdom to bear. So you're exceedingly welcome. And we'll let you rant for the next 20, 25 minutes.
I really want to thank you, Norman, for inviting me. And I did say to Norman that in the 12 years that I was an elected representative, I never spoke for 20, 25 minutes. So that is a challenge, and I suspect I will fall short of that. But what I really am keen is to, if we can, have the space to answer any questions that you might have and have a dialogue. And I'm very keen to hear about the discussions that you have at your table. I would like to start tonight by just offering my thoughts and prayers with the PSNI Detective Chief Inspector John Caldwell after a horrific attempt on his life last night. And I'm sure I speak for all of us when I say that we wish him a very speedy recovery. I, for one, can't stop thinking of his son and the horrific and traumatic experience that he has gone through, his wife, his family and friends, and all of the children and young people and parents who were there last night. And while that is a live investigation and it is at a very early stage, the PSNI have said that a strong line of inquiry that is being pursued is that it was an attack by, and I refuse to use the word paramilitaries, but an attack by a callous and cowardly criminal gang. Gangs that thrive where there is despair, debt, desperation, alienation, anger, and poverty in all of its manifestations. From the poverty of hope and ambition, to poor housing, to poor educational attainment, to poor employment prospects and opportunities, to poor physical and mental health, often manifested in addictive behaviours, and of course, financial poverty too. All of these are interrelated, interdependent conditions that make up the poverty trap that turns adults, and especially children, into vulnerable victims, ripe for the picking, manipulation, and exploitation by despicable bullies who view human lives as dispensable in their ruthless, selfish pursuit of money, power, and control. I was asked by Norman to come along this evening to talk about poverty and public policy, and that is a huge area. And many of you will know me from my previous roles, but tonight I want to emphasise that I am not speaking from any party political perspective. I'm not speaking from a professional perspective. I'm now in a new role, but I'm here tonight just to share with you some personal insights and some of my own personal views and perspectives. Here in Northern Ireland, poverty is one of, if not the biggest debilitator in our society. Over 333,000 people live in poverty. That's almost 1 in 5 of our population. That includes 190,000 adults, working age adults, 30,000 pensioners, and over 110 100,000 children. The poverty rate is highest among children, with almost 1 in 4 living in poverty. And there are over 44,000 households here in this small place of Northern Ireland languishing on the social housing waiting list, the vast majority of them for many, many years. And in Northern Ireland today, men and women living in the 20% most deprived areas will die 7 and 5 years earlier than those in the most affluent areas. So my 3 questions are, how can this be right? How could this have been allowed to happen? And importantly, how can we try to fix it? The simple answer to the first question is that it isn't right. It is deeply harmful to every single adult and child that is lost in the midst of all of those statistics. And it is deeply damaging and costly to families, communities, our society, our education system, our health system, our justice system, our environment, and our economy. So how did we collectively, as a society, let this happen? Well, that's a big and a complex question, and we'll be lucky if we even begin to scrape the surface of that tonight. But I have some questions that I think it's important for us to contemplate. When did each of us in this room become aware of the cruel and harsh reality of poverty facing so many among us? And what did we do about it? What are we doing now about it? Are we really a caring and compassionate society, the one that we like to think that we are? And what is the role of social media? On the one hand, connecting us like never before, and yet on the other, dividing us and pitting groups against each other. Just the other day, I was sent a text message, and it was a quotation unattributed, but it really struck me. And it said, "People were created to be loved. Things were created to be used. The reason why the world is in chaos is because things are being loved and people are being used." Is that our society? And when we have the opportunity to decide who leads us, who will take the decisions on where public money goes, what public policy areas should be prioritised, is there analysis and policy solutions and priorities to tackle poverty and empowering people out of poverty up there at the top of the list of things that we think about as we go to the ballot box? Because if we don't, the poverty trap will only deepen and widen. From a public policy perspective, I think a key contributory factor has been the short-sightedness and the short-termism in the approach of government. And that's because it's trapped in the cycle of single-year budgets, which restricts planning. And it's also because we're trapped in election cycles, where perhaps too much of a focus is on policies that yield results just in time for an election. So what is required to try to begin to tackle poverty? Well, poverty, and you will all know this, its causes and its outworkings are so complex. And so to tackle them, you need a long-term vision, a long-term strategy, a firm action plan spanning 10 plus years. It has to be a long game, chosen over the attractiveness of short-term gains. And it requires compassionate and courageous leadership, a long-term strategic focus to ensure that you do the right thing, even if you suffer an uproar and a backlash on social media. And in today's world, that is not easy. And to state the obvious, there is no silver bullet to tackle poverty. There is no quick fix. And you can't do everything. Public finances are stretched as it is. And within the machinery of government, even with the best will in the world, there is, like all large institutional organisations, a resistance to change. And even among the public, there is a resistance to change. So, what do I believe that we need to do? Well, the first thing is that we have to make tackling poverty a political and societal priority. We then need to identify the transformational interventions that will make the greatest difference. And we need to follow through on that with the required legislative and policy changes that are needed, ensuring that adequate and sufficient resources are also provided, and importantly, and I believe that this is key, ensuring that government, so every single minister, every government department is collectively responsible and accountable for delivering change and tackling poverty. It isn't the job of one minister. Tackling homelessness is not just the job of the minister responsible for housing. Tackling educational underachievement, giving people better aspiration, giving them hope, is not the responsibility of one minister or the responsibility of somebody somewhere else with government stepping back. So what are the public policy areas that I believe will empower people out of poverty, prevent them from falling into the poverty trap and transforming lives? And I've come up with this list based on my own experience, but relying heavily as well on my experience in the past 12 years as an elected representative in North Belfast, as a councillor representing the Old Park ward, one of the most deprived wards, one of the most conflicted, one of the most divided areas that we have, and then as an MLA for North Belfast as well, and then as a minister in the executive. We need to support positive parenting, and we need to have measures that strengthen family support and ensure that young people have positive role models. And that has to be led and coordinated through early years intervention. All the evidence is there, it works, and it needs to be followed through. We need to also ensure that every individual and family has a safe, secure, affordable and good quality home. And we need to enshrine that as a human right, given that I believe that it is the foundation upon which you build your life. If you do not have a safe and secure home, roof over your head, how can you possibly maximize your potential as a human being? Your health suffers, your children's health suffers, relationships suffer, your children don't do well in school. And I've seen this. I've seen young children develop respiratory illnesses, falling asleep at school because their home is riddled with damp and they can't get sleeping at night. And that's in this day and age. It also means ensuring that everyone has access to education and to one that equips them with the skills that are fit for the future, but also provides the pastoral care that they need. It's about providing opportunities and access to decent paid work, creating an economy where people can live on what they earn, where they're not paid pittance and have all of their rights stripped away on 0 hours contracts, and where those who at times of their life find themselves reliant on the social safety net of welfare are not demonised as benefits grounders. It requires reorientating our focus on prevention as well as cure when it comes to public health. And that means tackling the health inequalities that are driven by poverty. And it also requires accelerating our efforts to tackle the climate emergency, but doing it in a way that ensures that there is a just transition. And that applies not just to our own community here in Northern Ireland, but right across the globe, where those who have contributed the least to the climate emergency are paying the largest price. I started off my comments and I cited a number of statistics. And what I want to do now is just take a few moments to reflect on one of the cases that I worked on as an elected representative. A young man came to me with a world on his shoulders. It was written all over his face, and it was very brave of him to come to me. And he came to tell me that he had been in a relationship with a lady, and he had subsequently broke up and found out that she had had a baby. She was battling very severe addiction issues, and the little baby had been taken into care. And this young man, on his own, had been battling with social services to try to get, first of all, a relationship with this little baby with the ultimate goal of being able to get full custody. And I joined this man on his journey as he tried to do this, and went with him to meetings with social services, and every obstacle that could be put in this man's way was. And it came down to a crunch moment where we were getting close. He had done everything that was required, but what was required was that he needed a house with an additional bedroom. And the housing executive said that they couldn't help and they would have to wait several more years because he didn't have enough points in the system. So that young man was going to be kept separated from his daughter. His daughter was going to be kept in care because he couldn't get help to get social housing to meet the requirements of social services. Now, we managed to get it sorted, and it was a long, hard battle. And the reason why I tell that story is because all of the failures in public policy collided and crystallized in his life and his little daughter's. But why I also share it tonight is because he did get custody of her. And when he got custody of her, she wouldn't speak. She was wet in the bed. And now, several years on, she is absolutely thriving. She is doing so well at school. She is doing so well in a range of extracurricular activities. And her father is absolutely shining. And how I know this is because we've stayed in contact, and he proudly sends me photographs of her school report, photographs of her dancing and playing sports. But he shouldn't have faced every single obstacle. Given that he was committed and he was doing everything he can, he should have been supported, and that they should have been reunited at a much earlier stage. So what I do think we really need to have, if we're serious about tackling poverty, is we need a public debate on our policies, our priorities and our values as a society. One of the things that I believe COVID taught us was that we need physically and mentally, emotionally and spiritually, we need to be connected to one another. And we're stronger when we are together. COVID was a horrendous time, but what a lot of people found most difficult was being separated from each other. So what does that tell us about what we need? So I believe that we do need to have a public debate. COVID was a global disruptor, and I believe we faced a fork in the road, and we could have chosen the road less travelled by, to quote a Robert Frost poem. But I fear that we're just going back to doing everything the way that we did before. And I believe that we can choose a different path, but I believe that we have to be willing to try to do it, and we need to have the courage to do it. And what I do want to say is that politicians from right across the political spectrum are in it for the right reasons. I may not agree politically with a lot of them in my previous role, but I know that right across all parties, there is a desire to try to build a better society, but they need encouragement. They need to be pushed. And so the lasting thought that I will leave with people is that maybe it would be a good thing if we all adopted the view that we should judge our society by how well it cares for its most vulnerable. And if we take that approach, then I have no doubt that we will be in a far better, a far stronger, and a far more brighter place. Thank you.
I'm just going to ask you a couple of things, but first of all, so grateful. That was just wonderful. You talked about the fact that no minister, no department can sort out, for example, housing or welfare or health on their own. Could you just tease out a wee bit, say, take education. How does education cross departments?
Well, if you look at education as a skilling up or an education that goes through life, then it begins with early years. Like the point I made around parenting, you know, parenting is the most important job. You're not skilled up for it. I'm not saying you should go to school to learn to be a parent, but you need guidance. You need some kind of support, and yet in our society, that support is not always there. So the point that I'm making is that for me, education is about skilling up, knowledge, right in your journey throughout life. And that's why it requires health, it requires education, it also requires the Department for Economy, because we need to make sure that we have an education system that is skilling up our young people for what employers going forward will want. We need to ensure that the curriculum is updated. So it's about, you know, we talk a lot about outcomes and the programme for government, which, you know, whatever your views, and that was never agreed in the end. But the one positive thing about that is that you have outcomes that you want for your society. For example, every child deserves the best start in life. And so is that just the responsibility of, you know, Sure Start? You know, it's not. It's about making sure that we take that as an outcome right across government. For example, when I was a Minister for Infrastructure, when I went into the department, I was saying, what are we doing to improve people's lives? And some people were of the view, well, we're the Department for Infrastructure. And I was like, no, we're the department that physically connects people to school, to work, to opportunities. We should be providing them with green space, which is good for the environment, but also good for their physical and mental health and well-being. So I suppose it's lifting your mind out of a silo of a department, having shared goals, and then everybody putting their shoulder to the wheel. And that also makes economic sense, because government departments are stretched. But if we can pull resources across departments, draw in other potential funding, you know, then you're making sure that those resources are stretching further and they're being used in a smarter way.
Okay. One other question before we go to tables. You talked at the end there about the spiritual dimension of all of this. It's maybe not an entirely fair question, but I'll risk it anyway. What are the key contributions you think the churches and the faith sector can make to dealing with poverty?
Leave pulpits and go into communities. Go to where people are in pain. People are suffering when they are, like so many in our society, and I've seen this as an elected representative, they came to my office not with a problem. They came with a problem, but what they were really coming to was because they felt that no one loved them or cared for them or valued them. They were lonely. They just wanted to know that you cared for them. And there's an emptiness in people. I mean, I think about this a lot. Why is it, you know, is it our economic system? You know, is it this individualism? Is it social media? But there is something missing. People are increasingly unhappy and they are turning to destructive behaviours to self-medicate for it. And we need to have a conversation about that as well. Like, what is missing from people's lives? Because they're not happy. They're buying. They think by buying things, they're making themselves happy, but they're not. So for the church, I just think it's, you know, go out, be in communities, be with the people who are hurting, support them, you know, give them the space. You know, churches, you know, have opened up to help Ukrainian refugees. They've opened up as food banks, you know, spaces as well where people can go that need support with addiction issues. That's what churches should be used for.
Okay, thank you. We've asked Lynda Gould, who will introduce herself in whatever way Lynda wants to introduce herself, to maybe just reflect on the last, on tonight and the event we had a month ago with on poverty as well. So do you want to come here, Lynda, if you would?
I like that. Do you want to? And then if you
yeah,
would.
well, you do. You're being told. You're being told.
Lynda Gould, I'm Project Coordinator in NICVA. NICVA is the umbrella body for the community and voluntary sector, and since 2016 it kind of has taken up the work of an organisation called the Church's Community Work Alliance, and so it now has taken on that faith engagement programme. And one of the things that we do is really just support faith-based community work. We offer practical support, helping with governance, fundraising, training, and more recently we've been thinking about faith and community development and how they support and enhance one another, and particularly then about what is the role of faith in society. We also coordinate meetings of the Community Faiths Forum, and then during COVID we helped the Executive Office meet with the widest possible group that we could get together around of faith leaders, and that was a good experience. I mean, I just want to say thank you for the opportunity to respond. It's been great just to sit in on both of the sessions. The conversation and inputs have been rich, and each contribution, I think of all things, it highlighted the complexity of poverty. In 5 minutes, we're going to take a race through things that struck me, but inevitably, it's just light touch, and you'll have more in yourself that you're still sitting with. Thinking back to the last one, Ciara's input reflected on the deeply damaging impact of poverty, particularly on life expectancy, on health, and especially on our children. I'm still troubled by her comment about the implications of years of lost development. And it made me then think about how often Christians are often problem solvers and fixers, knowing how to get things done. Sometimes, though, the love of doing things to help the poor takes precedence over understanding why people are poor in the first place. And plugging gaps isn't going to eliminate poverty, nor is telling government that they're getting it wrong. All good things in their own place. But I wondered after the last week, are we at a point now where the church needs to change tack? And I'm speaking about the bigger church and using it with a capital C. Is it time to articulate a Christian vision for society, to put good back into society? Maybe the church needs its own programme for government as a model. Maybe that's something contemporary Christianity could start working on. Johnny's input then, coming from the perspective of food banks, it was a heart call to the church if you were there. His question was probably couched more in his quotation from Martin Luther King Jr. It was blunt, if you heard it. And he was asking that by running food banks and warm hubs, again, good things in themselves, is the church simply becoming another service provider? What about the task of nurturing prophetic interrogators? And I think he made me think that, you know, when he referred to the church, he did use an example. He said, we can organise if we want to. It really just depends on the issue. And so, inevitably, I was wondering, well, what's so different about the moral issues that we are known for championing? Those issues now have relegated poverty to the margins, and is that right? Danielle spoke on behalf of, or in her role as Evangelical Alliance in Northern Ireland. I suspect we will all recount her passion. She had lots of it, and through it, she modelled a real openness about the need to learn from others. She talked about the power of collaboration and how it changed her as a practitioner. For working outside of the faith sector made her work better because she was outside of her comfort zone. So again, in reflecting on that, how can the church build better collaborations, especially with organisations where faith isn't usually on the agenda? Surely the injustice of poverty demands that we end silo thinking, that we stop reinventing the wheel and push ourselves beyond all of our comfort zones. And Nichola, tonight, 3 things struck me from what you said. Long game. If we take anything away, think about that, because short-termism is limiting. And the importance of supporting families in that concept of long game. Joining everything up, we come to that one many a time in the churches, and then being judged by how we care for the most vulnerable are three things that I'll take away. You certainly made me think about whether the church has a long game when it comes to poverty. There remains a temptation for us to settle for short-term fixes as much as it's for those who are looking to be re-elected. And your challenge to join things up is timely. I think churches are in the habit of drawing lines. And lines contain, they separate, they demarcate. And yet poverty demands that we all start rubbing out these lines and end the competitiveness that has maybe defined us. Overall, I think the two evenings have given us 4 particular gifts. The gift of knowledge. We have to learn more about poverty. Sadly, ignorance binds us to overly simplistic thinking and action. We need to remember that poverty has a name. And as Johnny noted, hundreds of people come into churches every week to access food banks, but the focus is on helping, not listening. We learn that proximity to the poor is vital, yet sadly those churches that are within touching distance are under-resourced. Something needs to change. Can we not do better by working collaboratively? Second gift is praxis. That's the wonderful dance of theory and practice. Is it not time for some homegrown, robust thinking about the role of the church in the face of crippling poverty? Shouldn't we be asking all theologians on this island to wrestle with the morality of 1 in 5 children living in poverty in the 6th richest country in the world? And what could be learnt from other faiths, minority faiths that are so rarely asked or listened to? Now, that may be a collaboration that would take many outside their comfort zone. Third gift, compassion. Irenaeus of Lyon wrote, "The glory of God is a human person fully alive." Now, I'm not seeking to argue the theology of that particular statement, but in the face of the dehumanizing consequences of poverty, surely the gift of the church has to be to rehumanize the world, and especially the poor. Human flourishing ought to be given the same attention as care for salvation. Lastly, the final gift, courage. I think tonight has been a call to have courage. Nicola's courage to take on responsibility at the level she did. It's an exemplar for all of us. And while we may never stand for public office, but if these events mean anything, then we must find courage to speak to our own leadership and structures and tell them that poverty is a theological issue, not a ministry. Last thing I want to do is, of course, I've left it sitting over there. Norman, do you see that book in front of you? I just want to recommend a book. It's called For Good, and let me just see, The Church and the Future of Welfare. It's by 3 writers, Sam Wells, you'll know from, if you follow anything of St Martin in the Fields in London, Russell Rook and David Barclay. It's an accessible consideration of a theological rationale for faith-based social action and asks what is the appropriate place of food banks, debt advice centres, breakfast clubs and street pastors alongside the state's welfare system. These are the questions that are coming to the surface in these meetings and other places where I am working. And I think it's time that we had a really good conversation about what it is, the place that we are in right now, and how we can do better by thinking and then acting, rather than just acting and then thinking. So that's my reflection, Norman.
Well, thank you, Lynda, so much for that. Lynda knows me well enough to know that I'm going to ask her to do something. You had a script. We would like you to write that up as a PS blog for our website. So that's more a demand than a request, and that will be available in the next few weeks. Okay, Lynda? Public deal. Okay, thank you. Well, thank you so much to everybody. Can I finish with a few, they're not announcements, they are matters of practical import. If you could bear with me, we're pretty well on time. The first thing is that, as ever, we have a number of our publications available down there on the table. Feel free to take any one or two or as many as you feel you want that would be of help to you, that they're just there for the taking. The second thing is to report that, if you remember at our last event a month ago, we had a box for giving something to the Trussell Trust in North Belfast and the St Vincent St Patrick's Food Bank. We raised just under £300 and that has been sent to them. And those will be accounted for properly in our annual accounts. But just to let you know what it was, and thank you so much for that. And if you want to do the same tonight, there is the opportunity, as they say, to give a silent collection. Where's the wee box, Stephen? Oh, it's this wee one here, that wee one there. Okay, so if you want to do that, and again, please be assured it will surface in our annual accounts. Our next event will be on loneliness, the horror of loneliness, not unrelated to what Nichola actually was saying this evening. And that will be after Easter. We haven't quite got the date tied down yet. But Dr. John Kyle, who is somewhere in the room, where are you, John? John will be fronting that event. And just in case you didn't know, John is the new High Sheriff of Belfast. So you have to treat him with great reverence and care for this calendar year, at the end of which he reverts to being just John Kyle again. So that will be on loneliness sometime shortly after Easter. I do want to finish by thanking Nichola again for being here this evening. But I think we would do well to pray at the end. Nichola mentioned the shooting in Omagh, and I think we would do well to pray for the police and for the school and so forth as we end. So let's do that. Our Father, we are incredibly grateful for the privilege and the safety and the security and the opportunity of being able to meet here together and to think about this really troubling area of poverty in our land. But we are very conscious that it's not the only really troubling thing. And we want together and individually to pray for John Caldwell and his family, to pray for the staff who are caring for him in hospital, to pray for the family as they are supported and comforted as best can be done by friends and family and neighbours, and to pray too for the police officers of the PSNI, not only those who are investigating the attack, but every officer who now knows that they are under very direct threat. We pray for the Chief Constable and his senior team and ask that just the protection of the Spirit of God will be upon them, not only physically, but in what they decide, how they decided, and that the families of our police officers will also be on the receiving end of your mercy and grace. I want to pray too for the children in Omagh in the high school, to pray for the principal of the high school, for Christos Gatassis, for the senior staff, for all the children who have been traumatized and affected, for their families, that again, your Spirit will do a really special work in each and every home, and each and every mind, in each and every life. So Lord, as we leave this evening, we are really grateful and just seek the blessing of God in the fullest sense of that word on our province, on our churches, on our public services, on ourselves. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you so much.